Hello, I am Bob Lingle of Off the Beaten Path Bookstore in Lakewood, New York, and I'm here today with Andrew Krivak. Andrew is the author of 3 novels: The Bear, a mountain book competition winner; The Signal Flame, a Chautauqua Prize finalist; and The Sojourn, a National Book Award finalist, and winner of both the Chautauqua Prize and the Dayton Literary Peace Prize. He is also longlisted for the 2021 Joyce Carol Oates Prize. Krivak lives with his wife and 3 children in Somerville, Massachusetts, and Jaffrey, New Hampshire. And in the shadow of Mount Monadnock, sure, which inspired much of the landscape in The Bear. Andrew, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Bob. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate this. I'm a big fan of your part of the world.
Thank you. And I wanted to thank your agent, Molly, for helping set this up, as well as Eileen from Parson Weems. Eileen is the reason that I was able to discover The Bear, enjoy The Bear, and sell a lot of copies of it. And we also had a chance to meet last year at the Winter Institute in Baltimore before the world shut down. We were talking about a little bit of that before, but that was very bizarre to look back on. If that event was a month later, we could have been ground zero.
That's right. Yeah. Don't want to think about that.
No. In going through and preparing for this, I noticed there was a book that is not on your in your resume for your updated biography, but one that I wanted to talk about just because it's connects us in that we both had, well, I'll just call it, for lack of a better word, failed attempts at joining the religious leadership world. Your book, Long Retreat, documents your 8 years of being in the Jesuit seminary.
That's right. Yes.
I lasted 8 weeks in the Northeastern seminary. As a Protestant, not quite as long as the time you committed, but if you wanted to talk about your experience there and what led you into the world of writing.
Yeah, sure. There are a few books, also a book of poetry and a critical edition of letters I did of the poet William Carlos Williams for my PhD that aren't on that list as well. But a long retreat, yes, and you know, it's interesting and fair. You know, you use the term failed attempt, but that memoir was a way of, after I'd stepped back for many years from it, to talk about moving into, moving through, and then moving out of this specific religious life of the Jesuits, who are an order of Roman Catholic priests in the Catholic Church. But A Long Retreat takes its title from The Long Retreat, which is from St. Ignatius Loyola's Spiritual Exercises, where every Jesuit who wants to join the order has to do this 30 days of silence, where Ignatius, it's a form of prayer, what Ignatius calls a contemplation in action. And it's comes out of his time in the, was it 16th century, during the Reformation, when the Jesuits were founded, where he didn't see it necessarily as seminary, as a place where you go to be formed. To him, the Jesuit should be formed in the world that we are, that the Jesuit is a man for others, and the road is his home. And he calls the Jesuit the contemplative in action. So the Long Retreat is the sort of the core of prayer, where you're constantly moving with God, no matter where you are. I mean, I lived in Moscow, I lived in the South Bronx, I lived in New York City, all these places, and many Jesuits around the world have the exact same experiences of different places. So I left because of well, many reasons. The reasons I entered were not the reasons I wanted to stay, or I eventually decided to leave. I had, after 2 years as a novice, I had taken vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, which every religious order in the church asks their members to take. And I studied a lot. I studied a great deal. I did philosophy. I taught philosophy. And there was a kind of creativity. I'd come out of the Columbia University creative writing program in poetry. My first book was a book of poems. And I found both I lived and worked with some Jesuits in the South Bronx, and just that sort of action of these men in the world really appealed to me. And I thought I could also sustain my creative life in the times when, almost like a prayer life,
Mm-hmm.
That was increasingly more and more difficult. And it just came to a realization where something creative in me was going to be stifled if I had continued to live this life. And the book documents that. It becomes by and large a decision out of obedience. You can't do. A writer has to listen to what he or she needs to do. I'm reading the Odyssey with my high school son, and we're talking about the muse. Right from the start, sing muse. And I don't necessarily believe there's a muse per se objectified, but there is that obedience to the creative spirit. And so in the same discernment I made to enter the order, 8 years later, I made a prayerful discernment to leave, and have many good friends who are Jesuits now and still, and I think in many interviews I've talked about, the being a contemplative in action as a writer, thinking about what Ignatius calls the a composition of place in prayer. So when I think about a place that for instance, in the Bear that I've described or written about, that came from some of that 8 years of Jesuit training. It's part of my life. Can't shake it. Don't want to. It's who I am. And so that book was an attempt, A, to try to make sense of those 8 years, and B, to try to write a book. That book taught me how to write a book. And so I don't know. I think that answers your question.
Yeah. And so much of your writing is personal. Obviously your first one in the Sojourn, the Signal Flame, have roots in the history of your family. The origin story for the Bear, you wouldn't think that a somewhat dystopian end of the world type novel would also be tied closely to your personal experience or your personal history. Explain where the Bear originated from.
Yeah, well, from moving towards father with a capital F to just being a father with a small f, just trying to put boys to sleep at night. And isn't it funny that the stories I tell them put them to sleep at night, or at least used to? They were. I would just make up stories on the fly, and they seemed to know where I was getting at, and they seemed to know I had this gig. And it was one time during Christmas. Kids. I once heard early on as a parent that you should try to connect your children as much to your past as to their present. So I talk about my grandparents all the time. Talked about my father, my parents. They've long passed away. And I used to always talk about my dog that I grew up with, Troy, our dog Troy, a black lab. We don't have a dog. We live in Somerville, Massachusetts most of the time. So I think a dog in a city is a bit of is a shame for the dog in some ways. But so I told him a time when our dog Troy got lost in the woods around Christmas. And my father and I had to go looking for him. And with the help of a talking bear, with the help of a bear, he led us to where our dog was. And Troy came home with us. And that was the best Christmas gift ever. And they just thought this was so cool. So even when they got older and they knew that, bears didn't necessarily talk and they should probably avoid them if they saw them in the woods, they just kept asking me to tell them the story. And I think it was, just that place where wonder, I don't think we ever really lose that sense of childhood wonder if we're clued into it enough. And so though I realized pretty quickly, I don't really have an interest in or an ability to, is more like it, write for children, young adult or middle grade or whatever you call it. But So I was trying to think about how could I bring story like this into a place of literary fiction, give it a kind of heft to it. And a lot of other books just made me wonder that. Randall Jarrell's The Animal Family, which is a children's book. My editor for the Sojourn and for the Bear sent that to my children years ago, and I read that to them. They loved that. But then also, Richard Adams, Watership Down, about the rabbits. I was reading that to them when I was writing The Signal Flame, and that really helped me get us write about nature more and more, because I was thinking about, well, how does Adams really get at that quintessential landscape of the Downs? And it occurred to me, rabbits, he's writing from the perspective of right at the ground level. Mm-hmm. Whenever I was stuck in The Signal Flame, I would just think about Pennsylvania and think to myself, rabbits, it's about the rabbits. Get in there, get at that level that you were at as a kid or as a teenager, write about that. So after several more drafts, I was out fishing one day in Thorndike Pond, where I have a house. And I just started wondering about what this place must have really been beautiful when the first peoples were there. And there are plenty of stories about the indigenous Native Americans from those times. And then it just occurred to me, because there was a vast sort of misty landscape, and there aren't a lot of houses on the lake anyway, but everything was sort of completely obscured, the tip of Monadnock as well. And I thought, wow, what's it going to be like for the last? And this story that had been troubling as a writer, trying to figure out, okay, what's the arc of this narrative? It occurred to me, that's what it is. And I rowed my boat back to my writing table, and I sat down and I wrote down essentially the first couple pages, which then sort of launched me into the story. But it was really deciding. I hadn't started out wanting to write about human extinction, but it was that notion of trying to keep the two balanced, the beauty of what is and the sadness of what would be lost, trying to keep those two in a balance, that made me think this is what this book's about. And then that's the first sentence. Mm-hmm. Then you got to stick to your guns. There's a logic, and you've got to follow it. Okay, if these are the last two, what's that going to look like, and how are they going to live? How are they going to act? Everything for the moment. So. And
you mentioned your kids. How you have 3 children?
Yeah, I do. 2 of them teenagers now. My 2 sons, one's 15, the other's 13, and my daughter's soon to be 11 next month. Yeah.
Was the daughter the inspiration for the girl in the bear?
She's yes, I'll say yes, but they're all inspiring in their own ways. I think that's the fascinating thing about kids. All 3 of my kids are so wildly different, and so it's a bit of an amalgam. Who became the girl. An early draft was a boy, the man and a boy. Mm-hmm. But that was early years ago. And it seemed to me that, well, for a couple reasons, as my daughter grew up and I saw this real spirit that she has, I thought that would be something to capture. My boys are really spirited as well, but there's a quality to the youngest girl, the youngest sister of 2 boys, that is really hard to match. And then also, I started to think about it, for lack of a better word, theologically. And because the Judeo-Christian creation story has man first, I thought it would only be fitting to have a woman be the last, because that's the way it should work out, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a thought, something that you had said, and then it went away. But, no, that's okay. It means I was caught up in what you were saying and not thinking about what I wanted to say next.
Is that theology?
Well, kind of the theme and a recurring thought throughout the book is preparing, like we all have to leave. I wrote down the consequence of existing. You talked a bit about that, but how much of it was the inspiration of like what your thought process was behind the characters and what they were dealing with?
Yeah. that doesn't happen overnight. I think that was a real organic process of the long struggle of just writing, of trusting the process, trusting yourself. It's not, I struggle in a different way now than I did with the Sojourn or with the Long Retreat, for instance. I mean, the Long Retreat was a struggle at its own level. But like with my first novel, The Sojourn. So I think to answer your question though, the first iteration of A Man and a Boy, they were trying to get to a mother and a daughter who there was separation. So essentially, I knew I wanted to work with a kind of journey narrative, and so enter the bear to help. The bear helps the journey, and that was just a sense of like wanting to combine, bring nature in a bit more intimate connection with humanity. And then when it was The Man and the Girl, they weren't yet the last two, but civilization was far off, and they lived off the land. They were separated, but it became a situation where the man gets back to the house and he lives a sort of domestic waiting, and the girl has to journey with the help of the bear for the two of them to be reunited. And without spoiling much, I realized that too broke the arc of the story in half, and it just wasn't working for me, and it had to be about the girl. Mm-hmm. And so in many ways, she was always being prepared by her father to be the last, and but yet there's a sort of innocence to them as well. I was hoping to capture. Nature is a place that is quite dangerous, and nature is, without spoiling, it becomes something of the demise of man and his own desire for knowledge. So again, going back to the origin story of the creation myth. But there is also, I wanted to also create I love writing about work, and I think that the making in the novel, the making of the novel, as well, from my own perspective, that working is where I feel like we are all so intensely living in the moment, no matter what we do, billions of people or two people. And I guess I found myself really wanting to write a book about living entirely in the now. And the only way to do that was to just have these two go through their day-to-day lives in many ways. It's not just it's not a domestic book. Clearly, you see there's a lot of struggle in it. But the moments where they are doing what they need to do, making what they need to make, and living the way they need to live, day by day, moment by moment, season by season, time is always measured by the earth in that novel too. Another thing I had to realize, I had to, stick with. And so that sense of the now is really, again, once I just started thinking about it and working on it, it stuck. A writer friend of mine pointed this out to me, and I wasn't even aware of it, but he, I guess unconsciously, he loved the scene where the man and the girl are looking through the old foundations, and he finds a piece of mirror glass, mm-hmm. just broken up, and he gives it to her, and there had been conversations about, well, what did my mother look like? And he says, you'll see her when you look in the lake. The water mirrors her face. In that sense of we are who we've left behind in many ways. And he said, and the girl looks at the glass, and she said, I'll make arrowheads with this. Mm-hmm. It was brilliant because, well, I don't know. He said,
I enjoyed it. Yeah.
She could do anything. There could be a meditation on what her mother looks like. There could be a meditation on the parents in general, but they've got to eat. They got to move on. They're journeying to get salt so they can continue to cure their food, tan their hides, and do everything that needs to get done just to live season after season. And so that's really the moment. That's a kind of living in the moment part of the novel that I was trying to capture. So, yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say we've picked up some viewers since we started. So just wanted to let everyone know, if you're popping in, you don't know what you're watching. This is Andrew Krivak. I am Bob Lingo. Andrew is the author of The Bear. if anyone has any questions, whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, you can use the comment section and we'll see those. Anyone who's read the book, we're trying to avoid spoilers. I am. And so just keep that in mind with any of the questions that you may have. You've stated in other interviews that you really wanted to be a musician, but, and I relate to this. I have a couple of guitars and a keyboard that collect dust. Music wasn't something that really worked out for you, but music influences your writing. How did music specifically influence your writing for the Bear?
Yeah, that's a great question, because of course nobody plays any musical instruments in the Bear. There's nature is music. In general, yeah, I studied piano. My older brother was a rhythm guitarist in a really popular band in Wilkes-Barre, and he and my other older brother used to just bring home so much great music. I have playlists that I created on iTunes in the 60s and the 70s, and it just throws me right back there. I love playing the piano, and I really had to sort of fight to play the piano at a place in Pennsylvania where, you know, boys are played football. I played my share of football, but I loved playing the piano. I picked up the guitar, played that, and I think I just realized I wasn't really good enough. I didn't have the chops, you know. And I still play. I have my guitar downstairs in my office, and I have a piano, nice upright Yamaha now in my son's bedroom. It's the only place where it fit. Once I started to write, once I sat down and could get to a book length composition, the whole thinking of music really became an extension of mine to the keyboard. And I'll say this, you know, I started out writing poetry, and I always loved formal poetry. Certainly loved the innovation of the modernist and contemporary poetry, but there was an element of just meter and rhyme that appealed to me immediately. And I think it was because of music. It's sort of, I drum too. And I realized when I studied Greek as an undergrad that the word prosody the word pros is Greek for song, and it's just what makes a poem sing. And so that's always fascinated me. So I'll tell you, Bob, that I literally, when I sit down at a keyboard to write, I feel like I'm at a piano. And I'm always trying to listen to the measure of a sentence. Is that the right word? Should it finish on this rhythm or that rhythm? Is that the place where it should be? Should that sentence have a comma? Do I want to go more, you know, staccato in this way here? I can't shake that. And there are times when, if I'm not writing well and I'm just tired or it's not coming out, I just don't hear the music. But when I write well, it's almost like I just hear the music. My wife now will say to me, "So, you know, did you hear the music this morning?" And it's like that. So with the Bear, once I rode back from my little fishing excursion and sat down at my table to write, I started to hear the music, and it was more just the pines, really more the music of nature, but also the way in which writing itself should, in my estimation, should approximate a kind of prosody as well, even just prose, especially prose. And it's not that it has to be sing-songy, but it's got to be balanced. That's why I wanted to finish the novel on that single syllable word, born. Only if didn't ruin anything, but it just had to be, for me, that word.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and I feel like that really, the musical aspect of it came through. Like for me, I felt like I was reading a painting when I was reading the Bear. And whenever I've talked about this to customers, which has been a number of times, they say it's beautifully written without being like super flowery with language or over descriptive. Like if Stephen King wrote the Bear, it would be 400 pages, description of every single tree and every little nook and cranny in the woods, and every word that is in the Bear needed to be there. So well done.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
I did, just out of my own curiosity, one last point on the music. Do you listen to music while you're writing?
No, I can't. I really can't. They're two different worlds. Yeah, the only thing I can listen to when I write, and it's quite soothing, is I like to have a window open and just listen to the sounds outside. If I'm writing here in Boston, I don't mind a little bit of traffic, as long as it's not like car alarms or anything like that. Like the swish. It's like a Joe Henry album. Do you know Joe Henry? The guitarist, piano player, producer. He has these albums where, he'll in his recording studio, he'll open a window and it's fascinating. And then in New Hampshire, it's bird song. It's the wind in the pines, things like that, but no music. That's separate for me. Yeah.
Maybe I should stop listening to music. I've attempted to write. I always need to listen to music. And maybe that's what's holding me back. Probably not, though. We have one question, and this is actually, I feel so uncomfortable that on the pronunciation of your name, and which is not great because it's another one of my favorite authors from this year. She wrote What Could Be Saved, Lise. We'll guess. She said, I really love the book. I wonder what you had to say, what the author would say he intended the bear to signify.
To signify. The bear itself, the animal.
Lisa. Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about a signifier for the bear, honestly. I'll tell you, though, that I have done a lot of research on bears for another story. And what I did think about consciously with respect to the bear, like why not a wolf, that sort of thing. The Crossing, by the way, Cormac McCarthy's The Crossing is one of my favorite novels, so that would have been a good one to pick. But I wanted it the setting of the eastern range of the United States, so New Hampshire. The black bear is nearly ubiquitous up there, and it has that quality, like from West Virginia, Pennsylvania, right up into Maine. That is. That animal is part of the landscape. But bears have always been fascinating to humans because I think of the human-like quality. They can stand on their hind legs. They have almost that face. And in the old languages, there was a belief that anytime you spoke an actual animal's name, an animal's actual name, it would appear. People loved bears, but they feared them. And so the word Artko, I believe, was what the Indo-European root of bear was, became the Bruin, the brown one, or the bear, or in Russian, Medved, the honey gatherer, that sort of thing. So you wouldn't say the name because you didn't want to bring it on, I think when I realized that I wanted nature to communicate with the girl, that veil, there's a sort of a veil, again, talking about Genesis, going back to the place where that separation, there is no separation between humanity and nature and all of creation. And I wanted to have that veil lift again. It just seemed to me that the bear had to be the one to speak. And I can't say anything else about it. It just is. He is. It is. It is a male bear. Yes, it's a boar, because the male bears wander. The sows do not. The dam bears, the mother bears, do not. So,
I kind of saw the bear as the overall power of nature.
Yeah, very powerful. Yeah, and that's fascinating too, because they're the way in which human-like, the mother bears are very devoted to the young. These, and yet there's that gender split of what the male bear will do. They go off. They'll wander by themselves for hundreds of miles, but the female bears don't. And so it's that again, it was almost like a journey narrative and a coming of age in and of itself, just thinking about the life of a bear. Mm-hmm. And generationally, of course, that plays a part in the story as well. So,
a question from Anne Marie: do you believe in creationism?
Do I believe in creationism? If you mean that, do I believe that the creation story of the Bible is literally true? I don't believe that. I don't read the Bible literally. And now we're getting into some very heavy duty theological stuff here.
Yeah, we don't have to go much
But,
any further than
than that. Okay, but I do think that I do believe in a creator insofar as I think that a mover of the cosmos is almost cannot not be. You know, there is no, for us, there is no not acting, no matter what we do, no matter what material state we're in.
Mm-hmm.
And that recognizing that with a sense of wonder is a kind of worship for me. I'm very comfortable with that. Teilhard de Chardin was the great Jesuit scientist who pushed this in about the late 50s, early 60s. So I don't see a separation between thinking about creator God and a universe in which in which being cannot not be. So that's where I would go with that.
It's kind of a follow-up to that from Barb. Do you feel that the Jesuits prepared you for seeing God in nature?
The Jesuits were one step along the way, absolutely. But I was being prepared to see God in nature as a boy. My Slovak grandmother, my mother's mother, who grew up in the old country, her husband fought in World War I. He's part of the many characters who make up Joseph Vinich in the Sojourn. She was outside all the time. My mother's favorite expression was "go outside," and my father had a garden. We lived on a dead end street where a bear would walk up, in the morning on our way to school. So we'd have to wait. Don't go to the bus yet. Nick saw a bear run up the street, so we'd have to wait. But there was that. I've just lived in nature, around nature all my life, except when I grew up and started living in cities. And even then sort of sought out the places where I could, catch a glimpse of the moon between buildings and such. So that worshiping God in nature, or at least I should say seeing God in nature is more like it. When the Jesuits were just another piece of that. And I think that's why the Jesuits and I, got along so well for 8 years, is because they had recognized that formation process was in me already from the very people who raised me. So yes. And in fact, I'll say too, along the second piece of that is, well, I love going to back to my, up to New Hampshire. I spent a lot of time in the ocean, done a lot of sailing, and I've always imagined that I would just live by the water somewhere. So living on a lake in the shadow of Mount Monadnock is a little strange for me, but then I realized that it's the perfect homecoming for me. So much of the smells, I was just up there today, and so much of the dirt that emerges after the snow melts in spring is just the smell of my childhood from living in Pennsylvania, northeastern PA. And it's a place I had to leave in order to become who I am. But, as an older man now, I enjoy going back to in memory and with the peace that age gives a person.
Getting into the process of writing the bear and what went into creating the characters, what were some of the psychological factors that may have come into your mind of they're the last two people? What does that do to a person?
Yeah. I'll tell you some, well, let me answer the question this way. I was Zooming with a group of high school students last year who read The Bear. And there was a student who asked me, why didn't the girl kill herself, knowing that she was the last? And what kind of despair must that have made her feel? And I was shocked to hear the question, but it didn't really make me think it was like a terrible question. I thought it was quite brilliant, because that struggle with loneliness and what does one do when when you're in a situation that's completely unexpected, and who knows what we're prepared for. But I answered the question by saying that The Bear is really a novel. Well, not really, but one of the things The Bear is about storytelling. And the girl, like all of us, understands because this is the one thing her father has taught her, understands that she is living the arc of her life. It's been given to her, and she live it out in nature as she finds herself in whatever's given to her. So it's the puma says this to her when they're in the bear sleeping in the cave, and it's really that critical moment in the middle of winter. The puma says, if you die, the bear will remember you and remember the few days, the short time he journeyed with you, and he'll go on and keep wandering as the bear does. And if you survive and he wakes up, then the two of you will journey together as well until you have to make your own turn back to home. And that's exactly, I think, what I was thinking about with the girl is she will walk the arc of her narrative as long as that takes her. And that's what writers do. You draw the arc of your narrative. If you're Stephen King, it's 400 pages long. Mm-hmm. If you're me, it's 118. And that's what I imagine for her. That's why there's no despair, because she understands that this is the arc of her narrative. And so, psychological preparation, I honestly, again, will go back to that sense of living in the moment and living now. I've said this to a few other people on podcasts, is I'm reaching a place where I'm getting to be sort of against interiority as a writer. I think that I see a lot of, I think that writers like Dostoevsky and Henry James are brilliant for the psychological fiction we get. But I also really love writers who have the characters look out, and there's the same kind of moral decisions they make, but they're making moral decisions based on what they see and the world they perceive around them, rather than the decisions they make by going over possibilities in their heads. So the bear is a bit of my own attempt to write against interiority, which is ironic, perhaps, because who do they talk to? They just talk to each other. Mm-hmm. So it would be hard to imagine a more interior life, for instance, especially for the girl as she becomes a woman, than that. But
well, I feel like what your attempt was and what the characters realized was that they're not the center of the world.
Thank you.
It's a very non-selfish way to exist.
Exactly, and nor is storytelling ultimately necessarily. I mean, who knows? I don't know. But it was something I wanted to throw out there and contemplate. Really, is who's to say that humans are have the lock on storytelling? Mm-hmm. It's we know that trees and fungi have a neuro communications network. Every botanist and forester knows this. Trees that are bad in drought will sacrifice themselves so that other trees that are good in drought can live. Trees are social. Older trees take care of younger trees. And animals, of course, there's plenty of examples of social animals. And so I think I wanted to sort of tip the scales on hubris, on we humans who think that we're at the peak, rationally, creatively. What if we're not, and likely are not? So yes, so the man and the girl just see themselves in the continuum of the now and have to live there.
It's a good segue into Gal's question of, do you think non-animals have an understanding of humans as they do in books?
I don't know. And I just don't know. I mean, I think they probably have some understanding. They must wonder, like, why do they do that? But I don't mean to be facetious. What I do mean the way I would answer that is to say that precisely not being able to know is maybe my point, is that the communicative properties of other animals, the ways in which they would think or have emotions or have an interior life, it's just we're just not there yet. And that sort of agnosticism, that kind of Socratic ignorance, if you will, is not a bad thing, because what it does for me, like to take that question, is to sit back and say, that's a really good question. The next time I see a situation where maybe that squirrel is sizing me up, or who knows, that would then be a part of my thought process. So yeah.
There's two related questions. One from Tony Ann, why didn't you give the characters names? And from Kim Austin, during the writing process, did you have names for the characters?
Yeah, the characters never had names. And that is, again, I should keep going back to some theology here. It's because of that first question you asked me, Bob. The naming process in the Genesis story is precisely so that there would be so that it would begin the kind of hierarchy of the chain of being, right? Humans and the creation ladder, if you will. I don't know exactly what scripture scholars would call it, but I wanted to reverse that and just say there was no need for names. That names are just a differentiating factor. And what would it be like if they're just they just know each other in their essence, in who they are and how they act? I think that's really what I was thinking of. And so in the same way that Adam is just the man and Eve is just the woman. So without giving them names that mean man and woman, they're just the man and the girl. I'll tell you, Bob, and also the questioner, I had a passage where the bear asks what the girl's name was, because he knows that he had heard other humans give names. Actually, that could have been problematic time-wise, but essentially she said, what do you mean? He says, well, when the man called you, what did he call you? And she said, why would he call me? And he said, if you weren't there and he wanted you to come to him, what would he say? And she said, he wouldn't say anything because I was always there. So that sense of the two of them the two are never separated. And so it was yet another thing I thought was critical that would be part of that's part of their being the last two. Much like, telling time with nature, they don't need to call each other anything. They just speak to each other. So,
and this may be related, and it's something
There was another question though. Did I answer that? Was the one on top of the names?
Yes. During the writing process, did you have names? And no. And then why didn't you give the characters names?
Right, there you go. Okay. So
the lack of quotations is something that's not just in the bear, but in your other writing. Right. Why do you make that styling choice?
Yeah, it is just a style choice. It's just they're just orthographic marks. And I think that the whole notion of fiction, if it were nonfiction or a sort of journalistic account, I would put quotation marks in because you need to know what Bob actually said or what Andrew actually said. But fiction is just an account. And I've always, I put quotation marks in the Sojourn. And if I could, honestly, I'd go back and take them all out. Because the whole notion of fiction is a storyteller, even if it's the first person, is telling the story. So in many ways, the whole notion of quotation marks isn't even an issue. But stylistically, I think that you can tell if you're able to separate when someone is speaking and know that someone else is speaking. It's as simple as he said, or that's enough. It should be enough if the writer is good enough to do that, and the reader is astute as well. That then those, honestly, those diacritical marks aren't really necessary. And you see from my writing style that I don't really like to fill a page. So why would I add extra marks on the page? And it does, again, not to be too facetious, but it really does come down to that. It's sort of efficiency in the same way that, it should be the right word, not the best, not the biggest word, but the best word. I think too that I've just decided that quotation marks are just clutter, and if people use them, that's fine. I read all the time, and quotation marks don't bother me when I'm reading. But I feel as a writer, I think after the Sojourn, I was maybe in an early draft of the Signal Flame. I tried it, and it was a great sense of freedom. And it really opened up my own sort of theory of fiction too in writing that novel. So that's why I don't use them.
Yeah. As a writer, as a bookseller, the inclusion of books in a book is always a noteworthy experience of why did they choose those books.
Yeah.
So the father and daughter it's mostly classic literature.
Yeah.
2 questions. How did you decide which books they would have? And kind of a deserted island type question. If you were in this experience, what books would you want to have?
Yeah, that's a great question. All of my books have books in them. That's the way it is.
Yeah.
I don't know why I started out that way. I think because books are so much a part of my life. Books were literally something that were the ability for me to journey out of my small town of Dallas, Pennsylvania. My parents were both college educated. We had books lining the walls in our house, and not a lot of folks from where I came from had books in their houses. So that was sometimes perceived as being odd. And I had to fight for my books often, like with my fists in growing up, just because, books were something that sissies carried. So I had to prove that I was not one. But, you get over that. So for me, it just seems critical that books are passed along. And the cool thing about being a writer and putting books is that you get to pick the ones you want. It is a kind of desert island discs.
Mm-hmm.
So in The Bear, he does pass on the classics to her. And again, what are the classics? It's one person's classic is another person's, shrug. And so, but the books that I was commenting on were books that are journey narratives. They're coming of age. They're myths where the line between humans and nature is a little bit off, skewed. Things happen. Veils lift. That's why those books I refer to are in there. Wendell Berry, I met Wendell Berry. I love his poetry. And if anyone, he's one of my favorite nature writers on poetry. So I would imagine a book like that just in a sort of library would make its way. And Hilda Doolittle, I've always loved her poetry from when I was doing my PhD in American modernism. And what a great name, Hilda Doolittle. And also I was thinking of her poem Sea Garden early on in her imagist, her time as a so-called imagist. That poem, when I was writing the approach to the ocean that the man and the girl make, I added Hilda Doolittle subsequent to that because I was trying to think of what they would experience. When you come to the water at that sort of verge of ocean and land, there's that smell of the salt, the smell of the sea roses. And all I could think, I just was like, that's HD's poem, Sea Garden. And I went back just to check it out and make sure it was. And I just thought, great poem. Always loved her work. And awesome name. It's about the names. Mm-hmm. Curiously enough, to the name questioner, I named those 2 writers, but the man and the girl don't get one. So,
there was a question from Barb, and it was on my list as well. Saving for later on. She loves The Bear. She discovered you through The Signal Flame. She's wondering if there's a 3rd book in that collection.
Yeah, well, The Bear is on its own. So it's not part of what I call the Darden series. Yeah, back to Darden. Yeah, there is. And I'll just say that. There is. And it's finished. To be, what's that? What do they say on television? Oh, to be continued.
Yeah.
Hang in there, Barb. I think you really like it, actually. I had a lot. It's much longer. But I really enjoyed writing it. I get it. It was sort of my ability to go back to the people in Darden, tie up a lot of loose ends, and I don't know, maybe say goodbye to Pennsylvania for a while. So.
If anyone does have any questions, we're getting closer to the end of the hour here. Something that this will be the first time that we're incorporating it, but it's going to be something that will be a part of our author events in the future. highlighting a nonprofit organization that's important for the author. And Andrew, you had mentioned that you wanted to talk about New Hampshire Lakes, the nonprofit organization.
Yeah, New Hampshire Lakes does a lot of great work to keep the lakes in New Hampshire clean, protecting the lakes from invasive species like milfoil and things like that, zebra mussels. And they do fantastic work all year long, but primarily in the summers as well. So they are a fantastic organization. And also, I'd like to shout out to the Monadnock Conservancy, Mount Monadnock. They protect land in the Monadnock region of New Hampshire and do a fantastic job. So those are just two local nonprofits that mean a lot to me.
And I put a link in to their website on Facebook and YouTube. So if you wanted to look into those, please do so. Andrew, are there any final notes that you wanted to discuss? Anything?
Let me think, Bob. First, I'm really grateful. I'm grateful to you for doing this. I'm grateful to Off the Beaten Path Books on all independent bookstores that have just been, you guys have really made life bearable this past year. So I cannot say thank you enough. You guys have been fantastic. I'm glad we met in Baltimore. That was super. I'm often asked about the bear as with respect to ecology. Does it have a message with respect to climate change and things like that? And I've never really seen myself as an activist, but I guess with the bear, I have to say that I wasn't just striving for literary fiction. If books are made of books, then books also have something to say to anyone who sits down to read them. And I would love it if people would, if they go through the bear and they see the disparity of language, and they see a kind of wonder when the veil lifts and there's communication between animals, nature and humans, or the human. And I wonder just about asking the question, not so much what if, but what about now? Does that make us look any differently at what we have now? So in that sense, is there an element of a cautionary tale in it? Perhaps, what if we just looked a little differently right now at what's in front of us? And if that made a difference in half the people's lives who read the book, then that's more than nothing, right?
Right.
So that's my only note of activism. Otherwise, I just go back to, being alone in a room with words. So.
Well, thank you so much for your time. We have The Bear, as well as Andrew's other books, in stock at the store. You can also go to obpbooks.com. We have a whole list of events coming up throughout the spring into the summer and fall. Our next event is going to be with Stacy Flood, who wrote The Salt Fields. Stacy is originally from Buffalo, lives in Seattle. His novella is about the just after slavery ends, and it follows a character on a train leaving South Carolina and heading up north during the Great Migration. It should be a great talk. That's going to be on April 28th, a Wednesday at 7. Again, thank you, Andrew. Thank you for everyone for joining us. This is a lot of fun. Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Thank you for showing up. Appreciate it. Thanks for coming.